All right, welcome to the maiden voyage of the AGNT Podcast. My name is Jay Louricas. I am the host of this bad boy, and our first guest, Ryan Walseth. Wally, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm honored to be part of the inaugural tour. So.
Hopefully the first of many. And everyone sees who you are, and we end up on a podcast list
right?
someday.
Another billboard.
Yep, there we go. All right, so maybe tell us a little about yourself, what brokerage you're with, how you ended up in real estate, and we'll see where this thing takes us.
So, thanks for the intro. I'm with Lake Sotheby's International Realty, based out of the North Loop, live in Minneapolis. First got into real estate in November of 2006, essentially when things were tanking. That's when I got in the investment side. So been in that ever since, and then went full-time in January of 2018. Started with Remax, and then a few months later was recruited over to Sotheby's, and I've been there ever since.
Very cool. And what did you do before real estate?
There's 3 different gigs that I had. The main one was I went to college for exercise science. So when I got out, I worked at Northwest Athletic Club in St. Louis Park, which is now Lifetime. I worked there for 4 years as a personal trainer, and then I left and went on my own in January of 2005. So from 2005 to 2017, I was a self-employed in-home personal trainer. So going from house to house to house, training kind of the who's who of the Twin Cities business market. And that's where I met a mentor, what turned into a mentor of mine. And that's ultimately how I got into real estate.
Very cool. And so he was the big catalyst, and he was like, maybe you should give this a try. And
yeah,
sign me up.
big player in both the Minneapolis and the Chicago commercial real estate market. He likes to fly under the radar, so I won't mention any names. He's since retired now, living back in Chicago, but he owned Class A office space in downtown Minneapolis, LaSalle Plaza, Fifth Street Towers, some of the other iconic buildings in Minneapolis, but also up and down Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Used to own the Wrigley building and some other buildings like that. And so he mentored me in real estate while I was working as his personal trainer. I took over management of a brownstone in Uptown. I was managing that apartment building for 8 years. We bartered for rent while he trained me in as far as the real estate market is concerned. So by the time I transitioned full-time into real estate, it was kind of a foregone conclusion. And I ran into a guy at Monte Carlo restaurant in North Loop. And he's like, hey, I heard you got into real estate. And I'm like, yeah, got my license a few months ago, and I'm hopping in. And he didn't say, congrats, welcome. He's like, it's about fucking time. Because it was a foregone conclusion that I was trending that way. So
very
hit
cool.
the ground running.
And at what point did you kind of transition into more residential slinging houses?
Yeah, my mentor calls it a house jockey. But January 1st of 2018, a good friend of mine said I burned the boats. So I literally left all of my personal training clients. Very successful business that I've been running for 15, 16 years. Haven't trained a single minute since then. And it had to work out.
Back against the wall.
And when I did it, there's 3 things. For those that know me, I go out to eat about 5 or 6 nights a week, and 3 things I promised myself that I couldn't do until I closed my first deal was no concerts, no sporting events, and no expensive dinners. And this was right before the Minneapolis Miracle, and a buddy of mine from Colorado was flying in, big Vikings fan, going to the game. He had a ticket for me for $500 to go to the game, and I'm like, sorry, can't go. I promised myself I wouldn't do it. And so I missed one of the greatest sporting events or games in the history of Minnesota, but it's
Do you regret it now?
The $500 wouldn't have moved the needle that much, but I was staying true to what I promised myself. I couldn't do those types of things till I closed my first deal. So
very cool. So in the early days, you alluded to some of it, but where did you try to find your niche, or like how were you selling someone early on you?
All sphere. I joined a team. We did have Zillow leads. We had a co-spend with a lender in town, a lending team. So I got matched up with a lender on that particular team. There was a co-spend on Zillow, so we get Zillow leads. I'd work my side, the lender would work his side. But ultimately, I had built a really, really extensive network through my personal training, through the investment property side of things, and also in a little, kind of side jog in 2010, 2011, I co-founded a tech startup called mashup.com. And it was a cloud-based music service with a social network built around it. And we were raising money at the same time that Spotify was raising money. They were ahead of us, and obviously that worked out quite well for them and not so well for us. But we were essentially doing what you see on Shark Tank, but in real life. So invested a bunch of time, money, effort into it. We had 5 employees, 7 interns, an office in LaSalle Plaza on the Skyway right next to Crave in downtown. Did album release parties, went out to Coachella and did all that. So I learned a ton from that, and I still have people in my network from that, experience. That actually one of them, my social media manager, I met through Mashup. He was on our advisory board. So, yeah, my network was quite extensive from being in real estate, being in health and wellness, being in startups, and also some nonprofits as well. So
very cool. Yeah, I know the startup world well. I don't know if we've gotten into it, but I went to St. Thomas for entrepreneurship, had my own startup at one point. I'll save my story for a different day.
Well, ironically, our internship coordinator was from St. Thomas, so she was still going to school there. And she set it up where people would get college credit for interning at Mashup for us. And recently I just sold the house to her, and then another intern sold a condo to him in the North Loop. And so,
Yeah, it's funny. I guess quickly I'll run through it just because of the similarities on how much you do years ago really culminates into being successful today. I mean, my first job when I was 18 was at a real estate brokerage downtown DRG. Sure. When I was going to school full time. Went the startup path for a little bit, ended up in VC, bounced around that world for a little bit, and then found myself sitting on my butt doing nothing in COVID. And it was kind of those two things. It was along the way I learned some startup skills, the development side of it. I knew a lot of people in real estate, and that's ultimately, I guess this is debut podcast. So if you don't know, I own a real estate media company.
A successful real estate media
we're trying our best. We're trying our best.
One of the biggest things that I learned from the Mashup experience was risk tolerance, and taking a run at something, and it ultimately didn't work out. Lost money, lost time, but I mean, it was like a street smarts MBA. I had a colleague who was going to Carlson for the MBA program, and he literally is like, "You did in real life what we did in the classroom with case studies," and he ended up spending twice what I quote unquote lost. In what I invested in the Mashup experience. But I mean, it was invaluable. So I call it my Street Smarts MBA.
100%. I'll give my quick plug to St. Thomas because I love their entrepreneurship program because it can't be taught out of a book. And I remember pulling up to my very first entrepreneurship class, and you usually get your list of what textbooks you need, and there was nothing for that one. And I remember being kind of confused by it. And the first day of the class, the professor's like, "Welcome to entrepreneurship." It was 201, but the first one. And he was like, "The goal for this class is to start a business and make $5,000 by the end of the semester."
Boom.
And that was
no
it.
Books.
Good luck. And I'll be here if you need anything or have any questions. And that was how we got into it all. So
that's amazing.
It was a cool program. But anyway, back on track here. So you kind of had, I'll say, 2 starts. Your intro to real estate back in the early to mid 2000s, and then when you kind of turned residential, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is primarily what you're doing now?
Yeah. Residential, working with buyers and sellers, and then investment side of things, kind of small multifamily where it's long-term renters. I have some midterm rentals for traveling nurses, and then some short-term Airbnb experiential stuff.
So I've always thought real estate was interesting in the fact that there seems to be very little innovation in the last 20 years as far as what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a lot of things culminating right now on the tech side, the AI side, and I feel like the day's coming where something significant happens.
I hope so.
So I guess my question to you is, since when you were starting both originally in 2006 and even 5-6 years ago, like what is some of the biggest changes, either good or bad, that's had an impact in your business?
I would say the change has been glacial. I definitely marched to my own beat. So you're kind of toeing the line and testing some things, testing the old guard, if you will. The old, National Association of Realtors or the Minnesota Association of Realtors. It's almost like it's a union protecting the way it used to be, like pre-internet, right? And so now, like the disruptors, like your Zillows or your Open Door or OpenAI, right? Your ChatGPT and all that kind of stuff. I think that's scaring a lot of people in a good way. And a downshift in the market makes people, especially that have been in for a long time, question if they want to ride another downturn. Now, this downturn is going to be totally different than the last one, but there's definitely going to be a cleansing, and it's already happened. I mean, there's 80,000 lenders and over 80,000 real estate agents throughout the U.S. that have not renewed their license because it's challenging right now, and there's not a whole lot of deal flow. It's not that the market's not healthy; it's just kind of locked up. So I think now is a really good opportunity for some of the potential disruptors that are laying in the weeds, doing some acquisitions, collecting data, and are waiting for things to soften and things for the market to be vulnerable. And as you know, coming from a startup world, I mean, that's the best time to take a risk is in a down market, not when everything's hot, because there's a lot of people that sold a lot of real estate that they didn't love it, right? A lot of people that get into it like it. They're like, they get fancy dinners and the cars and the watches and all this other stuff, like the flashiness of it. But then they realize it's hard, especially in this part of it. But this is a time that people that have been doing the work are thriving. And I've had half a dozen agents over the course of the last few weeks that have called me. They're like, Wally, the market's shifted. What are you doing differently? I'm like, I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm doing the exact same thing I was doing 6 weeks ago, and 6 months ago, and 12 months ago, and 18 months ago. And now this is where you start to pick up market share.
Right. It's been interesting. I go to a lot. For the record, I'm not a licensed real estate agent, but I've spent a good amount of my adult working life in and around the industry. And so I go to a lot of real estate events on both behalf of my company and personally. And you saw a lot of people come into the business in like 2020 when rates were 2.7 and it was a gold rush. And now it's been funny to me, these young agents that have had, a hot 2 years are kind of looking around going like, what's happening? Like the market's terrible. And it's kind of like, no, the market's not terrible. It's just leveling off of the insanity that you were used to. And like you said, the startup builds a resiliency, but also like with startup, I feel like the common man sees the glamour in it. They see the success stories. And that's, of course, what we all chase. But the reality of it's very different. And so it's been interesting. And you kind of mentioned like the National Association of Realtors is kind of playing like old guard. It's kind of like an old boys club, so to speak. They don't want change because the way it's working and has worked is fairly beneficial for them. Like,
can I make an analogy? It literally just came to me, but maybe like what happened between Live Golf and the PGA.
Yeah, I've used this, but it's
is potentially what could occur with NAR, the National Association of Realtors, and some of the players that are laying in the weeds that could be Live Golf.
Yeah, and it's funny. I feel like Carson, our off-camera video guy over here, just had this conversation because we're both golf fans too. But PGA, the same way, was the old boys club, and Live did something unprecedented, and they spent a lot of money, and they kind of made the game fun and brought a lot of flair to it. And that's something like there's zero flair in the MLS or the National Association of Realtors. It's very black and white. For perspective on the marketing side, like we have to do things a certain way. The photos have to be a certain size, a certain resolution. There's a bunch of things that can't be in them. You can't market it before it's on the MLS. There's no branding. There's really no way to set yourself apart. And I feel like the MLS always chalks it back to like equal opportunity. And I kind of roll my eyes at that because in what industry is there equal opportunity? Like the best for economies and capitalism to work, like the best guys have to win and the losers have to fall off. It's sort of like the Darwinism that is the economy, and you just don't see it. And that's how you end up with 2 million real estate agents.
And another thing that happened during COVID is hospitality got crushed, right? But people that are in hospitality are personable and they know a lot of people. So it's easy transition because the unfortunate thing about real estate, it's a very low barrier to entry. It's hard to make it once you get in because it's sexy. You get in and then struggle, and either it's it's like you make it or you sink or swim, right? So a lot of people that were in hospitality transitioned into real estate, kind of caught lightning in a bottle with the way that the market was going, sold a fair amount of houses, but didn't build a business. Some of them did, and they're reaping the benefits of it right now. But that's the difference between transacting and building a business, which obviously you're familiar with and successful at.
Absolutely, and thank you. One of my big questions is, let's pretend like the MLS wouldn't fine you for it. Could today, as a real estate agent, you exist with the MLS without listing on the MLS? Like, let's say you were allowed to. Do you think you could sell homes without it?
Yeah. Two different ways to go about it. And that's the exciting thing about potentially where it's going. I'd definitely go all in on Zillow, because if you think, there's a lot of agents that just vehemently hate Zillow. And I'm like, how can you hate a platform where 98% of your clients are searching on? And that's a number that I made up, but it's probably not far off.
It's up there.
Right?
Sure.
Because the MLS, they literally just updated the entire platform. And I feel that they brought it from a 2005 technology to 2011. They didn't bring it from like 2017 to 2024. It literally, like the user experience is prehistoric. And Zillow, like navigating, I'm not very good at navigating Zillow, but my clients are, and I'm like, by all means. So I'd go all in. I'd go all in on Zillow. I'd pay attention to Amazon. And then, there's a handful of other ones. And then I'd have my own site.
Right. One of the interesting things about Zillow, so maybe this is a good point of interest here for us. To me, Zillow can never decide whether it wants to be like pro agent or if it wants to be your competitor. And like, they obviously had the interesting run with Zillow Offers where they were like, you don't need an agent. We're going to make this quick and easy.
Yeah.
And then at the same breath, they're like, we love agents. Buy our leads. We're working for you.
Yeah.
And so like, where do you, I know you said you have to follow the data at the end of the day. But like, do you think agents should like Zillow?
You can't ignore it. I mean, that was like Blockbuster ignoring Netflix or taxis ignoring Uber. You're going to get steamrolled if you ignore Zillow. And I just had what I call a meaningful coffee meeting with a large personality in the Twin Cities real estate market. And we were talking about some of the acquisitions that Zillow has made. And it's fascinating because after Zillow Offers went under, they're like, oh, Zillow's effed, screw them. They're, they've been against us and now they lost a bunch of money. I'm like, a little bit. There's a lot of things that Google has tried that hasn't worked out. There's a lot of things Apple has tried that hasn't worked out, but they have a war chest and they have a fuck ton of data that in the end, that's what everyone wants. And the more data that you have, the more market share that you're going to pick up, and the more that people are going to utilize you as a resource.
One really interesting one that hit home here is a real estate media company. In layman's terms, we do photo, video, floor plans, 3D tours, all of that for homes big and small, whether you're an agent listing on the market or you just built a 200-unit apartment building. We cover both sides of the business. But most companies in our industry use a back end to store all their photos, products, pricing, take in orders. It's a back end tailored for real estate media companies, and it's called Ario. And funny plot twist, it has Minnesota ties. I went to college with the guy who started it, so I've always kind of known about it, which is funny before I ever ended up in this business. But anyway, Zillow just paid $35 million for him, and on
Congrats to both of them.
Yeah, shout out to those guys. And the first day I saw it, I had an initial thought of like, cool. I didn't think much of it. And then I was starting to kind of hem and haw over it. And I was like, they have all of our data now. Mm-hmm. And that's spooky as they try to roll out, like they also acquired Showing Time, and Showing Time Plus is their photography brand. And I've started to hear whispers of agents saying that Zillow's reached out to them with creative offers to try to get their photography business, whether that's premier placement or lead credits, things of that nature.
That's interesting.
To do their photography with Zillow.
Yeah.
And
they know better than to reach out to me.
Yeah, right.
I'm taken.
Where I don't worry as much about our brand is we work with a lot of high volume agents who value their brand, and photos, what a lot of people don't realize, are more than just a tool of selling the house. They're how the agent sort of expresses their self, and ultimately agents sell our services to their sellers, and there's an expectation that we follow through, and we rely on our good salesmen, so to speak, for our business. But now it's interesting because Zillow has that data. They know everyone I shoot for, roughly 1,300 clients. Mm-hmm. They know what they pay. They know what products they book often. So if they want to and have the desire to, they have the data to easily just go down my list.
To go after
and
everyone.
Make a better offer, or figure out a way to make it more appealing to them through their other offerings, like leads or where your listing shows up on Zillow, et cetera. And so we're intrigued by that. But the big one that I think people are sleeping on is us as media companies. We're kind of an aggregate, at least the large ones. We're kind of an aggregate of the industry. Like, we know what's coming to market before it hits market. We know what's coming to market before you know what's coming to market.
Coming soon,
Legally I shouldn't say legally, but per MLS rules, like, it can't hit unless it's on the MLS within a day.
If you're licensed.
If you're licensed. So we end up in an interesting spot here where we have all this data and we know what's coming, but and we've thought internally about ways to play with that data. But now you take that times 100, because that's what Zillow has. They have all that data from all the media companies across the nation. And so I suspect you'll start seeing some things that I'm going to make this up, but like a yellow pin on Zillow that kind of says like high likelihood of coming to market because they knew photos were ordered on it, and you're kind of just reading between the lines. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be interesting because it's going to provide the average consumer more data, more reason to go to Zillow, more leads. Like, if you're clicking on houses that are likely to come, it's be notified when this house hits the market, and people fill out that, and now you're generating however many times more leads.
Yep. So
it's all a game, and that's really interesting data to me that we'll see how it actually plays out, but I anticipate it coming.
So I guess two thoughts on that as far as your position. Either your position to grow to potentially get acquired, or you go niche and just continue to have like that white glove service that you have with the top agents, because there's always a need for like a drive-through service. Like, people still go to Applebee's, right? It's not because like the food tastes good. It's just like it's convenient and it's cheap, even though you probably feel like shit afterwards. But there's still like, there's a lot of people. So you could try to cater to all the, those type of agents or those types of transactions, and kind of get messy because it's a newer agent. They're kind of figuring things out, or they don't have the support. Or you go niche, which, I mean, a reference as far as like travel agents concerned. There's still some really badass experiential travel agents that put together a freaking African safari for somebody that's going to spend $25,000 on a vacation.
Right. And that is kind of the way we lean. There's a lot of companies out there that just give you rudimentary photos for the sake of saying you have professional photography for $99 or whatever they charge for them. And it's not really our game for the obvious of we don't want to be the cheapest guy on the block. B, the agents that tend to use those are going to be your onesie, twosie agents who are more valuing their margin because they don't do enough deals. So they're really trying to like scrape enough money out of every deal to keep them afloat. And ultimately, those are the agents that tend to fall off on downturns. Yeah. And so it was a early strategic decision for our part, and even though it felt like the harder, slower road, was like back when we were a one-man band shop, like at the top, I had an agent pulling me the Market View broker list of top agents in real time.
Yep.
And I was making my way down the list, basically just trying to give them a unique offering. And a lot of that came from, like, if you don't want to pick package A, B, or C, you know, what's your brand? We'll cater to it. And transparently, that's gotten a lot harder to do at scale, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So that's been one of the
Specialized scale.
yeah.
One or the other.
And so that's been one of the interesting, you know, shifts in our business, and we still do it, but it's getting harder to scale it. But that's where I think we stand alone and are not going to be impacted greatly by Zillow, at least not yet. You know, who's to say what Zillow does? And ultimately, Zillow hasn't had like a great track record in the last handful of years on their new products. I had an advisor who was very close to me and was a big help in me starting this business, and he's a former Fortune 500 CFO. St. Thomas faculty is how I met him. And I was expressing these concerns, and he very plainly like rattled it off the top of his head because it was funny. And he was like, Zillow's lost 66% of their value in the last 5 years. They have 50 open photographer positions. Don't be distracted by Zillow because they're going to distract themselves.
Yep.
And that's kind of, we just hold our course here, and maybe that's naive, but
No, I think there's addition to like the two books that are presented to you, the Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and then Gary Vaynerchuk, who I started following when I was doing Mashup in 2009-10 when he was doing Wine Library TV. So it was like before he was who he is today. But there's another guy that I'll listen to, one of the top TED Talks out there, Simon Sinek, where he essentially said the power of why, right? Mm-hmm. People buy why you do it, not what you're doing, right? Or people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, right? And he's got one that talks about Microsoft and Apple, and it's a fantastic watch because the gist of it, the cliff notes is Microsoft is focusing on Apple and Apple is focusing on Apple, right?
Right.
Sometimes Apple's first, sometimes they're second, but they're still just focusing, like, keep your eye on your bobber, right? Mm-hmm. And so he was at a conference, and they gave him the new Zune. Microsoft gave him what was called the Zune, and nobody knows what it is, but it was a competitor to the iPod. And then the next week or next month, whatever, he's presenting at Apple, and he was in the back of a limo with some Apple executives. And he said, you know, I was at Microsoft last week, and he's trying to ruffle the feathers, and he's like, they gave me a Zune, and it's beautiful, and it's user-friendly, and it's a much better experience than the iPod. And the Apple exec turned and looked at him, and he's like, I have no doubt. And that was the end of the conversation because they were focusing on the iPod.
Right.
And they didn't care what Microsoft was doing. So,
right. The interesting piece, too, that Zillow's really transformed in the last 10 years is how the buyer looks for homes and how they interact with their agent. And I feel like it used to be taught, and maybe the agents still try to preach, but, you know, whenever you're thinking about buying a home, call an agent. Like, that's the first step. And even when I was in brokerage in 2018, and I know this still happens, but it was like, here's what we're looking for, set up your search parameters, you get the MLS search set up, you're getting emails every day, like, you're actively searching with an agent. And now I feel like so much of today's buyer, especially the younger, you know, millennial buyers, tech-savvy buyers, already know, like, they've been on Zillow for a month, they've already had the search set up, they know this, that, and the other, and they're just calling you when they find the one. And that tends to be, and then sometimes you don't get the one and you end up back down the road with your agent. But it seems like there's been the life cycle of a buyer's from the time they reach the agent has been a lot shorter. Do you think that's
yeah, it can be. And the thing is, people are on Zillow even when they're not looking for homes.
Oh, yeah. It's a content platform more than anything.
Yeah. I mean, the number of times that I'm at a restaurant and somebody that's next to me is talking about buying or selling a home, even when they're not like buying or selling. I mean, they're going through it like on Zillow, like Pinterest or TikTok or, I mean, it's almost like a social media platform. And that might be another opportunity for them to even make it a little bit more personable. But yeah, you have to be top of mind for sure. And that's the power of social media. And you have to be on social media at all times. And I feel just educating people about real estate and the reality of what the market is, not the perception of it, because there's just a lot of clickbait in the media about how bad the market is. People like to watch crashes, right? I mean, you don't like watching, NASCAR, people just driving in circles, but everyone will tune in for the crash, right? So it's the same thing as far as media is concerned. They have some sort of clickbait headline about what the next crash is, and it's mainly just recency bias because that was the last recession that we had was housing led.
Right. And if you follow the money too, all the media is trying to do sell ad dollars, and more views is more ad dollars. So disruption gets more views and more ad dollars. So
exactly, and it's working.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part. You had said early on, you'd been doing the same thing 6 months ago, a year ago, 6 years ago. You haven't swayed. One thing we always preach, and of course, as someone who sells services to agents, we have a sense of bias, but I always tell people, like, as agents, you're all sort of hunting in the same woods. And when the weather gets bad, the only agents that guarantee themselves that they don't eat are the ones that run and hide and wait it out. And so that's kind of one of my analogies that I'm always
I like that
preaching, especially as we go into winter, just on a seasonal basis, and slight downturns in the market.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting this winter. Is it your intuition or opinion that rates will start to trickle back down, or what do you think's going on there?
Yes, but I don't think until late Q2. And the reason for that is we have an election coming up. And so if rates are high and the housing market is slow, the economy overall is slow.
Right.
And if you're going into an election with a economy that's not really moving along, people are looking for another option. So I think that would be political suicide if rates stayed high and the housing market stayed kind of locked up where it's at right now. So that's why I think rates will have to come down if the people that are in office right now want to stay in office.
So if and when rates come down, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's in my opinion that they'll level off around 5 something. Would you share that opinion? Or
Yeah. One of the things that happened during COVID, the administration got scared and thought, holy shit, everything's going to stop. And the housing market didn't. Like myself as a real estate professional, we continued to do showing. My days were not really affected by COVID because we did all showings in person. People want to feel the house, right? You're going into the house. Difference is we wore a mask and had hand sanitizer at all of our listings. Whereas a lot of people were sitting at home just kind of remote work and distance learning and all that kind of stuff. There was no reason for rates to go below 4.
Right.
The housing market was healthy. It was jamming. And now that it went below 4 down into the high 2s, and people did a ton of refis. So lenders were printing money both on purchase business and refi business. There's no reason for anyone to sell a house that they bought in 2021 and 2022, like ever.
Right.
Ever. Don't sell the house unless you have to, right? Unless it's like transfer of wealth, and maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. But don't sell that house.
Yep, I'd
unless
agree.
you need to. So yeah, I think it'll start to loosen things up, but there's still a lot of buyers that are looking to buy. And if people are sitting and waiting right now for rates to come down before they hop in, inventory is not going to increase. But the number of buyers that hop in, aka your competition, is all going to hop back in to a really small swimming pool. Multiple offers are going up, over ask. You're going to have more cash instead of, if you find something that you like right now, even though there's not a whole lot of inventory, if you find it, buy it, sit on it for 6 to 12 months, refi when everyone else is scrambling for a very low inventory market when rates come down.
Absolutely. It's been interesting, like you mentioned, all the headlines, all our horror stories. In the business, like I said, we shoot about 3,000 homes a year. We haven't been slow all year, despite what everyone's been saying.
Yeah.
And I don't think
Neither
we're going to get slow. And sure, like maybe you can attribute that to some internal things we're doing in good business ethics and yada, yada, yada. But yeah, it's not been this like wasteland of a real estate market that like big media tries to make it out to be.
No, the market's jamming. I mean, I've put 5 listings on in the last 2.5 weeks, and they've all sold. They've sold for list. And one of the things that I tell, especially on my buyer side, when it was really, really competitive, let's say there's 17 offers, there's probably 2 or 3 legit offers and the rest are garbage. Mm-hmm. And so you're not competing against 17 offers. You're competing against 1 or 2 other ones, right? And now only people that are offering are serious about it. So maybe there's 1, 2 offers. There's other places that when they're completely dialed, you're getting multiple offers, and there's still a lot of cash in the system. So when there's cash, rates don't matter. So that's moving the needle as well. But yeah, people are dropping out. You start to pick up market share, and it's nice now too. The agents that are on the other side of the transaction, which you can't choose who's on the other side of the transaction, they're typically a professional that's full time and they're all in as well because they're doing transaction in a slower market.
Makes sense. So let's play out the scenario. Q2 rates hit 5s. Everyone that's sitting on the sidelines right now, scared of 7-8%. Is that enough for them to jump in? And my second part to this question is: are home prices going to shoot up again if and when rates drop?
Yes and yes. A couple things. One of the things that happened last year when rates shot up, buyers were like, "All right, F you sellers, we're tired of playing your games and getting into multiple offers. We're not going to transact." And so the market kind of stopped. Now that rates have been, plus or minus 6, 7 for better part of a year, people are starting to accept it, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's buyer activity, it's steady. But the ones that are waiting for mid 5s and they flood back in, home prices are going to skyrocket. I just saw something yesterday that there's 76,000 new construction homes put on right now or for sale in the U.S. There's 320 million people, and there's 600,000 or 700,000 listings total.
Well, and what you said too earlier on the inventory front, which just through natural supply and demand impacts pricing, all these people that bought a home in the last 3 years that are sitting at 2.7, 3.1, 5's still probably not enough to get them to sell it. And so now you're going to have that, I don't know the number, but 20% of homes on the market in existence that were purchased in the last few years. You have another third of homes owned by hedge funds that are all looped up that are never going to see the light of day again. You had a lot of people who had the cash that weren't worried about rates swoop in on the price dip. Yep. It feels like there's no houses left. And
correct.
And that's
the thing is there's also people that not only bought 1 house or 2 houses or 4 houses. I bought a couple.
Right.
Fool not to. And they're like, "Oh, prices are high." I'm like, "Really? In 2017, you said prices were high, so you didn't buy. Where are you at now?" Right? Mm-hmm. Don't try to time when you get into the market, time when you exit.
So 20 years, I have a 2-year-old. She's going to presumably be interested in buying a home in 25 years or something of that nature. Is this, if and when does this trajectory break? Because it seems like homes, granted there's inflation, sure, things will always be generally a little more expensive. Mm-hmm. But it feels like by the time my 2-year-old's about to buy a house, it's going to feel like, a LA, San Diego market where your starter homes are creeping up on $1 million. That's what it feels like. I'm not saying that's what it's going to do, but in your opinion, does something break before then, or is that what's going to happen?
No. And the reason is there's a couple different ways to think about it. One, I talk to parents that have young children about purchasing an investment property right now and putting it on a 20-year note. So then when your daughter is graduating from high school, you can flip, let's say it's a duplex in Northeast, so you buy it for $400,000. You do a quick claim deed, flip it over to your daughter, put it in her name, and then you give her options, right? So this duplex is worth $600,000. She's 20 years old. She owns it free and clear. She could sell it, pay for college. She could sell it, start a company. She could do a cash out refi and buy another one. She could rent it, and then she's got a business, right? She could live in it on one side, live for free, rent out the other side. It just gives so many options that are totally different than a 529 plan, which is earmarked towards college.
Right.
Maybe she doesn't go to college. Maybe it's, she's a musician, or she's an actress, or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
An artist.
So if I were to play devil's advocate, it's easy for you and I to say, just buy a duplex. Mm-hmm. A lot of people can't. What is that, half, if not more, of America who's already tied up and they have their one home and they can't even think about buying a second one?
Well, there's two different ways to look at how you intend to retire and what your savings and investment vehicle is, right? The reason why I buy real estate is because I'm not good at saving money. Mm-hmm. I go out to dinner a lot and I like to do cool shit, and I have a boat, and that, everyone knows that's like just throwing money away, right?
Oh yeah, bust out another 1,000.
Exactly, exactly, which is every other week, right?
Yeah.
And so buying a house, I have to figure out how to pay for it, and that's through tenants. And if tenants aren't in there, then I got to sell more houses to pay for that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's forced savings, and I have, I don't know, $10,000 or $15,000 worth of mortgages that I got to come up with every single month, and I have tenants that take care of it for me, right? So it forces me to save. It's a combination of the depreciation that I have in my taxes, it's the appreciation of the asset, and the tenants that are paying down the principal. Or I could do a 401k or an IRA, or if I had kids, a 529 plan. Everyone has some sort of investment vehicle. My choice is real estate because of, one, I understand it, but two, the tax advantages are insane, and three, it's a business, and it teaches you how to run a small company, right? Mm-hmm. If you have one duplex, 2 tenants, you're a property manager, and you got to figure it out.
Yep. So this has been good. I feel like this podcast is going well. I'm watching the clock. We're about 45 minutes into it.
All right.
So posing it up for the last 15 minutes here. We talked about the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. What is the biggest change in the next 20 years when we go back to considering AI, corporations, how homes are bought and sold, the death of the travel agent? Is any of that on the horizon for real estate?
Can I go? You touched on hedge funds.
Yeah, go.
Can I go?
Yep.
Can I touch on that?
Absolutely.
So there's a headline recently where BlackRock came out and said it's a really, really bad time to buy houses because home values are going to go down, rates are high, affordability is down, it's not a good investment. And then they bought 3,000 houses the next weekend. So they're telling you not to buy, so that's less competition for them. And then they started buying neighborhoods and renting it to the people that they told not to buy houses. Why would they buy houses if it was a bad investment? So what happens to inventory then?
Goes down.
Goes down. What happens to prices? Goes up. What happens to your rent?
Goes up.
Okay. So if you're not paying attention to, like I said, what Zillow is doing, what ChatGPT is doing, what BlackRock is doing, don't listen to the headlines. Ask me or I talk to a lot of agents that are way smarter and way more successful than me every single week because I want to get there someday. And they're all saying the same thing. So if you want to know, and that's what I try to do with my social media, is to educate my audience on actually what's happening and why I bought a house in the winter last year as an investment. I didn't even know what I was going to do with it. And that's what I turned into the Dollhouse Northeast, the experiential Airbnb, shameless plug. But I bought it. I'm like, yeah, I'll figure it out. Value's gone up.
Yep.
It's an asset, and now it's cash flowing. So that's my soapbox as far as if you're paying attention, stop watching the fucking news. Just stop, because it's not giving you sound advice. and people are telling you to do one thing, and then they're actually doing what they say not to do.
Right. And I think your ability to back it up with logic makes it, how would I say? I feel like there's a general bias. More and more people, I feel like, are like, you don't need an agent. And the minute you come into the game, you're pretty much told to say, it's never a bad time to buy, because that's what it feels like a real estate agent should be doing. But when you have the data to back it up, you know, it helps the cause of the real estate agent.
Yeah, and it's and like going back to 20 years from now, right? I would say 5 years from now. I mean 20. Who knows what's going to happen, right? But between now and 5 years, you're in AI. I think that is going to move the needle more than anything else. And if you're not getting into it, it's like older agents that were in pre-internet, and you got printouts of the MLS who didn't embrace social media. And if they're still selling their sphere and they're still crushing, fantastic, right? But if you're like, well, I don't want to do video, you got to do a podcast or do a blog or do something to reach your audience, right? And if you're not paying attention to AI over the course of the next few years, or have somebody like my social media manager, Lou, another hot Lou, shameless plug, has gone super deep into AI. I know enough to be dangerous, but I would say he's an expert, and he's always going to be in my corner because he's embracing the change. And so if you're not paying attention to that, you could be a relic in a real short period of time.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious off the top of your head, and I'm putting you on the spot, a business like mine, how do you think we should utilize AI?
I think the experience in showcasing homes, right? Because there's any mouth breather that can go in and take photos of a house and iPhone photos and put them out on social media or whatever else. But if you could figure out how to utilize AI to give people an experience, and maybe even get ahead of where Zillow is going. Let's say Zillow goes into being more of like a social media company in addition to a media company, and you can create an amazing experience like you guys do with your drone videography and your social media videography, and using AI to expand on that platform. I would say people are looking for an experience. And if you can't give them that, whether it's on the buy side or the sell side, I think that's where a lot of agents and people that are in the real estate business are going to struggle going forward.
Yep, I agree. So lastly, as far as future disruption goes, back to the MLS, I've been a big lobbyer, which is just all words, no actions, transparently, against the MLS. And I wonder very much so if there's room for an MLS competitor, the Live Golf, so to speak, in the source of like open source listing. Anyone can post to it, put whatever the hell you want on it. It's sort of the Wild West of let the best man win. Like, do you think something like that could actually have legs, and would enough people use it to pull enough people off the MLS to the point where they would have to compromise like the PGA did?
I think where the MLS loses strength is losing the number of agents throughout the U.S. that are paying dues every single month or quarterly or annual. I don't even know what it's. Which, I mean, there's a lot of agents that aren't renewing their license because it's challenging out there, which means they're not paying dues to the MLS, which when you have less money and maybe their data game isn't that great, I'd be concerned. And if somebody else comes out with some sort of Live Golf style platform, I'd be excited for it, you know? So I kind of hope so. Either that, or if something like that comes out and it forces the MLS to bring their platform up to 2024 standards.
Makes sense. Do you think, this is kind of an off-topic question, there should be some sort of standard that you hit? Say you got to do $5 million in volume within 2 years of getting your license, or you lose it. Do you think something like that would be good for the industry to reduce the amount of agents and let the good ones prevail?
No, because there's still good agents that don't do a lot of production, but they're in some other aspect of real estate that's complementary to the industry. You can make it more challenging to actually get your license, an ID, and being able to fog a mirror and go into 90 hours of class,
Right.
and you get a license.
But in theory, that would never happen because more agents means more fees, which means more money for.
Yeah, it's quantity over quality, right? But in a market that changes, and there's just a lot less transactions, there's a natural cleansing. So it's cyclical, and we're starting to see it.
What if your dues tripled overnight? That's something you could absorb, but the bottom third of agents probably couldn't. Like,
true. Yeah, that could be. Either that or there's a lot of fees and a lot of expenses. We're all 1099, right?
Right.
A lot of people think because I'm with Sotheby's that I'm employed by Sotheby's, and no, it's like get paid, then they have their cut. MLS has got their cut, and then I'm paying for photography, paying for staging, paying for all these other things. And then when I get paid, that's pre-tax. So then there's taxes on top of it. So there's a lot of glamour that looks like you're getting a big check, and then when it's all broken down and you get it, and it's a fraction of what it was, and that's pre-tax. It's challenging. I mean, you've got to do work. So I think the industry as a whole will just cleanse. If they raise dues, maybe people start looking elsewhere for an option or an off market or whatever, or you just let your license go and you're still doing transactions and you're just working with the title company. And I know some people that they'd probably be better off not being licensed because they have a lot less red tape and they have a lot less exposure to get fined for, marketing things that are not on MLS.
yeah, and that's where they get you too. Is it seems like they're just making up fines by the week every time someone figures something out or they deem something as a disadvantage to the MLS. Fine.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I think good agents or aggressive agents are always towing the line of getting fined, not for ethics, but for marketing a client. Because our job is to solve problems in real estate, right? And that's why I toe that line to try to get their house sold or to try to find a house for them to buy. But also sorry, I lost my train of thought here. I think that the industry as a whole needs to be much more collaborative. And this is another soapbox. I'm on Zoom calls for like weekly meetings for EXP, and I'm with Sotheby's. I go to Keller Williams continuing education classes. I have the top agent at Remax Advantage Plus. I call him every single week to try to collaborate. And so I think that's another thing that real estate as a whole needs to be more collaborative as opposed to competitive. And then
The
I think
abundance mindset.
I think it gets better. And one of the ways that I explain it to agents, that especially if they're struggling, I'm like, or they think that there's a lot of competition out there, is that if there's 20,000 transactions in the Twin Cities a year, that means there's 40,000 sides, because there's a buy side and a sell side. For lenders, there's less because it's just buy side and the ones that are financed. But if you do 40 deals a year, you're in the top 3%. So what's 40 out of 40,000?
Yeah, was that 0.01% or something of that nature?
Who's your competition? Right?
Yourself.
Exactly. So
awesome. Well, we're at an hour. Any parting thoughts?
No, I one, appreciate this opportunity, and two, I love what you're doing.
Thanks so much.
You guys are going to be successful regardless of what Zillow does or anyone else is in the space, because you're carving out your niche and continue to be a disruptor.
Yeah,
I
I appreciate it greatly, and we love working with clients who see it the same way. So thank you so much, and that is a wrap. The Maiden Voyage, episode 1 is in the books. We're going to have one coming up every week. I think Mondays we're going to start putting them out, and hopefully this thing gains some traction. We get bigger and cooler conversations every week, and
Yep.
who knows what comes from it. Maybe we're assembling our pool to launch the open source listing service.
Count me in.
All right.
I'm probably going to get fined for this.
Yeah,
but,
probably.
But that's all right. It'd be worth it in the long run.
We'll pay fines. Can we pay fines for anything that comes from our podcast? That's a wrap. Thanks, everyone.